The idea of managing as designing is to bring to focal awareness that what managers do most of the time is design things. Design organizations, design products, design services, design processes. And if they become better designers, they will be better managers and will live in a better world. I think we should care about managing as designing because the world needs new kinds of organizational forms, new ways to communicate, new ways of creating teams, new ways of collaborating across organizations, new ways of approaching familiar problems with an attitude that the alternatives that we had taken for granted in the past are not good enough.
There's a great deal in management. There's a great deal of executing the familiar. I learned to do it this way. This is how the person who handed the job over to me did it. I'm going to do it that way. There are several reasons why many of our great managers choose not to do it that way, and many of our students won't want to do it that way. One of them is the world keeps changing, as does the competitive environment. Another one is the solutions we have for many of our systems aren't all that great. They're environmentally destructive, or they're socially repressive, or they retard the rate at which children are able to develop and learn. They're just not yet the best possible solutions. But a third, and I think very compelling reason, is it's a lot more fun to go to work every day and design new things and new approaches. Herb Simon did many, many things in his career, but one that's most relevant and important to us and to this effort is he attempted to distill what makes good management. And when he did that, he said there are three kinds of things that make good management: intelligence, design, and choice. Intelligence has gotten a lot of attention. And we see it in market research, we see it in database development and so forth. Choice has gotten a lot of attention. Again, market models, decision theory, optimization models. Design has gotten considerably less attention. But once you get beyond organizational development work, there's precious little that goes on or has gone on in the last, say, 20, 30 years that's directly related in management, education at least, to design.
I was privileged to be the faculty member who worked with Frank Gehry and his associates on the design and construction of the Lewis building for the Weatherhead School. In that period of time, I came to see that they were approaching problems in a very different way from the way we approach them in a management school and the way we teach our students to approach them. I think working with the Frank Gehry group definitely has changed me. I mean, we're doing this project, which is essentially saying, we've been doing things wrong for the last 20 years in our teaching, so that's a change. And it's also changed my research. I'm now deeply involved in trying to understand ways in which managers are engaged in design day to day in their everyday continuous activity, even though they're not aware of it. And then trying to think of ways we can surface those design activities and help people reflect on them and get better at doing them.
As Dick and I made the decision after a long time together here to actually do some work in this area, we decided to take something of a design approach, and rather than nailing down in very formal and specific terms a research program, we thought it would be a great idea to bring together some very clever people who would have interest in the topic and just get a conversation going. And in order to ensure that it be pretty loose and freewheeling, we wanted to get people with a very diverse set of backgrounds. So we looked to have artists and composers and music critics alongside managers and social scientists and organizational theorists.
Well, I think that the pleasure started because we were told we could write absolutely anything we liked, and that we should, if you like, it was a flight of fancy. We should think about management, we should think about design, and we should be as provocative as we can. Now that's real pleasure for an academic, because in fact, in the main, we're not allowed that degree of freedom. So that was a very clever invitation. The other thing is, I trust the choice of participants. So I believe that I will find engaging people and interesting people and people with whom I can talk about art and music and design and management And that's already shown itself here. So I come with high expectations, which have been met.
One of the real richnesses of the conference was that there were people in music, there were people who were interested in design, knew about design, people who were making tax systems. I mean, it was a real strength of the conference that it was so diverse.
Well, first of all, we've been planning this for 2 years. And as you get closer and closer to the event happening, you start to get a little nervous. So the first time the whole group laughed, that was a great high point for me, because it showed, okay, this thing is working. I'd had conversations with Frank. He can be pretty unpredictable. He told me he didn't know what the hell was going on and what were we doing this for. But very soon he started talking, and he got really excited about the idea that his design process, let's say design process in general, and especially his personal approach, had the ability to carry over and inform other professions. And that managers would be better managers if they took a design approach to their everyday tasks.
I'm staggered by the breadth of thinking, the literary references, the art references, and I know very well that I'm in the presence of a serious group of people who are agonizing about things that are, in a way, very similar to the things I agonize about, although our language, our vocabulary is different.
There is a lot of talk and writing and even teaching around management that would suggest that what managers do is make decisions all the time. They do analysis, they run numbers, they make decisions. And when you go and look at real managers who are managing real enterprises, in particular if you're paying attention and looking out for the ones that people consider the good ones, you find that that isn't what they do most of the day at all. They do a lot of dreaming up new schemes and coming up with new ways of putting people together and making connections among things that wouldn't ordinarily be connected in the minds of most people.
Controlling people, allocating resources is what managers do in relation to a plan, to a vision. More and more, they realize that plan and vision are increasingly important. In other words, they become more what designers are, because this is precisely what design is all about. It is about envisaging a future state and finding a path through which this can be materialized.
Management has always needed design. You always need ideas, and you need to bring those ideas to fruition. We've got this ebb and flow. For a while, you know, there's scientific management. That was the 50s, the 60s. And everything is designed, and we'll just do things the way that they should be done, and everything will turn out fine. Then we realized that wasn't going to work, so we went into a period of, well, let's just let things happen to us. That doesn't work. Then we go back, and now it's strategy. We have to strategize. We have to design how this organization is going to work. And I think it's this ebb and flow that's going to be in management forever.
Management education, I think, has been stuck in a kind of, I'd call it a mid-60s orthodoxy that has outlived its utility by about 2 decades. And a lot is up for grabs now. It's just been hit with a series of shocks. One was the very disconcerting shock of the dot-com boom, which threw into question a lot of received understanding about how you run organizations. There was terrific resistance in management schools to engaging that. They kind of refused to believe it until finally the pressure got so great they all went in a stampede and started setting up offices in Silicon Valley so they could study it, and then it all collapsed. I mean, this is like a cartoon.
The simple design of a inappropriate bonus systems of stock options in big corporations now is giving us a lot of problems. It affects the whole ethical, the whole practice of the company's accounting system, the accountants, the legal, and then the Wall Street security.
I think there's a really strong and important relationship between design and design thinking by managers and the process of innovation. And we saw that in our work with Frank Gehry on the creation of this building. His design urge resulted in a desire to create architectural forms that forced the invention of new ways of shaping metals, forced the invention of new ways of framing for drywall and plasterwork, forced the invention of new ways of fabricating steel components. So there's this wonderful way in which design thinking and a desire to really push to a new level of creating a more desirable world, to create the conditions that stimulate innovation in very unsuspected, unanticipated ways that come back then to re-energize the organization and improve their functioning.
A lot of interesting ideas emerged in the course of the workshop, but 5 that recurred multiple times and struck us as important included multiple models, thrownness, collaboration, liquid crystal, and legacy. The idea of multiple models is one that shows up often in conversations with designers, and it was most stark with Frank Gehry, but one sees it in lots of other places. The basic idea is to have many models of the phenomenon that interests you, if it's a building, to have them at different scales, different kinds of models, models that feature various aspects of the thing under consideration. Now in management, that has immediate and obvious applicability. If you accept that there aren't simple solutions to most of the problems that are really of interest to us in managing enterprises, then probably these are complex phenomenon, and therefore multiple views of them will be useful. It's very tempting to say, if we could just get the right model. It's far more illuminating to look at a variety of models.
First of all, I think we as faculty didn't appreciate the process that they go through of continuous refinement and continuous evolution and continuous change. So we would tend to see a model and think this was the design, as opposed to having the sensibility of being able to say, this is a direction in which this design is going to go, and we can only sort of fantasize what they're going to be able to do with this direction.
I tell clients when I start that we're going to be in a liquid state for a lot of the time. In other words, information gathering, agonizing about program, adjacencies, land use, materials, bureaucracies that we have to deal with. And during that period, we make a lot of study models, and some of them are pretty scary looking. When you show them to a client, they get pretty nervous. I call them Shrek models. It's a Yiddish expression for making people nervous. I do that so they can follow the trajectory of my thinking, but it's not predictable. It's opportunistic. I push something here, and then I see something, and then I take that and I go. So I think of it as an opportunistic kind of process that evolves with the inputs that I'm getting from the client and the world around.
The other thing is that if you freeze to an idea too quickly, you fall in love with it. If you refine it too quickly, you become attached to it, and it becomes very hard to keep exploring, to keep looking for better. So the crudeness of the early models in particular is very deliberate, and if we're forced to, at a particular stage, to make a refined presentation model before the design has fully matured, it's a very painful process, because then you quickly try to destroy that image as soon as you've done it, so that you keep everything a little bit out of focus. That leaves possibilities always open, and it keeps you from bonding to the idea so much that you can't move on. It's a good lesson for business school because it says you don't know for sure. You think you know, but you don't know for sure. As an entrepreneur, you have to be comfortable with that kind of state of change, with newness, with the sort of adventure of it all, or I don't think you'll succeed.
The The word thrownness was introduced to the workshop by Carl Weick from his reading of Heidegger. The idea of thrownness is that our condition in the world, the situations that we face, are something that we are dropped into, as if we were dropped from outer space, plop, into the middle of a very complex, multifaceted, already working situation.
Design, lots of times, has the feel of starting out with a blank slate and you're going to do this project right, and you've got control over all of the kind of levers that you need, and so we think about our prescriptions for design from that standpoint. I think that's nonsense. I think if you look at any one of the Gehry projects, he's not invited in until there's been an awful lot of discussion and controversy and debate back and forth, is this a good idea or not? To understand him as a designer, it seems like you've got to picture him as dropped in the middle of a whole bunch of agendas and activities and interests already underway. He'd rather have it differently than it is, but to understand what he's doing, you say, this is what he inherited, it's not great, it's not ideal, and he works his way out of it. And so being thrown into a situation seems to capture the circumstance, the experience, what a designer has to cope with, I think, better than other kinds of, for me, than other kinds of terminology.
In both design and management, rather than green fields and blue skies, it's a question of working through things, working around things, knowing when you solve problems, knowing when you evade problems, making the most of whatever you've got, whatever it might be. And one of the words which somebody put up on a board, but which never really attracted a lot of attention, was bricolage. You know, I mean, what is a bricoleur? A bricoleur is someone who has a goal in mind and who will try and make the most of whatever is at hand to achieve that goal. That seems to me a good image for management, and I suspect actually it's how a lot of design works.
One wonders, why design at all? Why not just do the thing? And the answer is because it's bigger than you can do in one fell swoop. It either involves more people or it involves you over a longer period of time than you can keep it clearly in your head. And so you design. You do drawings or schematics, you write about it, you do some intermediate step between your idea and your realization of your idea. Improvisation is quite the opposite. It's where you're able to pull it off right now in the moment and do it now. And it requires a different attitude and set of skills, perhaps, than designing does. And it's another one of these dimensions where I think extraordinary leaders and managers are going to be capable of a balance, of knowing when the organization should be improvising, when they, as a senior manager, should be improvising, and when a design attitude is called for.
We do need strong leaders, and there is something about, the human brain likes to lock on to one person and attribute to this one person, oh, lofty person, you're so wonderful. And indeed, they just become the front runner for a lot of collaboration that's going behind. However, another way of thinking about it is that we live in a complex world, and no one person can possibly have the wisdom that's required to design and work in that world, hence the need for collaboration.
Particularly in today's world, it's very complex. There's lots of system interaction. You could have a great man who can be really smart, but it's going to be hard for that one person to really think about all the interactions, all the things that might happen, might go wrong. When you're doing a lot of things in managing, there's a lot of uncertainty, and you don't know what's going to happen. So you have a car, it's got 5,000 parts. No matter how well you plan at the beginning, there's going to be some unexpected stuff that's going to happen. If you think about, for example, the Ford Firestone case that we're all familiar with, one of the issues there was where it just happened that the design tolerance of the tire interacted with the design tolerance of this relatively tall SUV, that you got these problems of rollover and overheating, etc. Behind that was a problem of design of the system, where the suppliers were encouraged to come in with extremely low prices. And so there was some money saved up front. This made the purchasing agent look very good, but the kind of engineering that's typically done to make sure that problems like this, the kind of 1 in a million problem, doesn't arise. And you need collaboration because Ford doesn't know a lot about tires. Firestone doesn't know a lot about cars. They have to pool their knowledge.
You need a partner. You can't do, it can't be the sound of one hand clapping. You gotta, the best buildings, the best work is done in concert with a client. It works right working with my designers when they contribute the best they know how. I respond to them, they respond to me, and they're different personalities. So those personalities express when you look at a building I did with Edwin or look at a building I did with Craig, they're different. It's a different chemistry. That's interesting. But they do it wrong when they try to second guess me. When they say, think, what would Frank do? Then we're in trouble. I'm out of town and they have to make decisions and they start going down a track and they think, well, there's no use doing this because he ain't gonna like it. And when they do that, that's bad.
What kinds of stories do we want to tell about creativity, innovation, the genesis of new things? And particularly what kinds of alternate stories to the very firmly entrenched heroic tale of great, usually men from whom ideas spring as innate fonts of creativity. And that this morning I reacted very strongly to Carl's comment that Frank was concerned that his ideas lost their life as they were translated out and diffused into other people. Because I see the world in exactly the inverse way to the idea of how things circulate and the idea of figures like Frank, people who are distinguished by their ability to see connections, resonances where other people don't see them among things that are circulating in the culture.
There's a lot of talk about great designers and great managers and even heroic designers and heroic managers. And for me, the term hero is very closely associated with Beethoven. When we talk about classical music, we talk in a very composer-centered way. If you look at the books in a bookshop, the great composers, etc., Beethoven, Beethoven, Beethoven. And you would think that our musical culture was really just about sort of endlessly reproducing Beethoven. I don't believe that's why people go to the concert hall to hear a Beethoven symphony that they have heard so many times that there's nothing new in it. Except, of course, there is something new in it because the Beethoven symphony is a vehicle. It's a vehicle through which you hear performers. You hear a performance that's never been before, a performance that's different from other performances, a performance that itself involves, as I said, lots of different musicians interacting with one another.
Putting these kind of components together, the question becomes, well, how do we work together? And we need to do it in a dialogic way. Nobody's got the right answer. Nobody can figure out how do we get there from here. So it's a sense of how do we design this future and move towards it? What does it mean to design a future for our children's children?
The concern in designing is you've got sort of the basics, you've got the essentials, you've got the right essence, or you've got something that really works, and that's sort of visible in a skeleton. And then to flesh it out. And what's interesting about Gehry is apparently you look at these skeletons, and what you see is not clouded or not obscured by the subsequent kind of development. So he is able to add density without losing that kind of energy. So the sort of thing you want to hold on to is how does he do that? And is that for instance, or an example that I can follow through in other domains like organizations, like designing management teams and so forth?
I've come to really believe in a very widespread idea, which is iteration. And that it's about a reiterative process of fluidity and closure, and the trick is to keep that going.
I think for management, the liquidity, the serendipity, the opportunism has to just go on all the time. In that sense, architects like Frank Gehry have an advantage because there comes a point when the funding and the requirements of the job say, we're going to draw a line there. And after that, it's going to become increasingly solid. Now, for the manager, that happens by project, but management is about connecting all those projects together. And so you need people who can, at the same time, operate with liquidity and crystallization.
That's a Gehry vocabulary that people are trying to bring in and are finding plenty of management parallels to it. But what seems to be happening is they're using it as a choice. I get either a liquid thing or I get it crystallized. And designing, which is the beauty of this conference, is that ing, that innocent little ing that's on the end of design, designing, picks up the fact that you may want to move back and forth between liquidity and crystallization.
The creativity and the constraint, the short term and the long term, the technical, rigorous analysis, and the insight and intuition. It's balance between all of those.
Or it's somehow doing them in parallel, and maybe you do part of it and somebody else handles the other kind of responsibility, but they're going on simultaneously, doing them in an alternating manner, trying to keep a kind of balance in there, seems to keep eluding people because they say, well, it's too liquid for me, or I got to crystallize it, but now it's stuck and I don't know what to do with it. Well, designing ought to keep all of that stuff in motion.
Now, within an organization, you may have people who are very, very good technical analysts, and you may have very good people who are entirely insightful and opportunistic. And it doesn't mean that everybody has got to be both, but your senior executives, the people who are really leading the organization, do have to understand both and have an element of both in them.
We have a way to look at stock prices, to look at annual, even quarterly profits, and to think that's what management is really about. Those are surrogates. They're very bad surrogates. They're promoted because it's so easy to talk about such things. It's so easy to have a ticker tape flash in front of the TV screen. But managers are going to be judged as successes or failures by the consequences of their products, by the consequences of their manufacturing practices, by the consequences of their employment policies, as they affect our environment, as they affect the families of their workers, as they affect the communities they live in.
Management as design, I think, is to be conscious about issues like legacy. It's to be conscious about what is it we're trying to create without even necessarily knowing where we're trying to go, but to say, we know this is not good enough. How we live currently is not good enough. How our organizations run is not good enough. So how do we get more consciously towards something that we could all feel is worthy of human aspiration?
The idea of legacy really came to me through this workshop. It came to me because I thought of Frank Gehry's buildings, and I thought that is the most extraordinary legacy. Visually, conceptually, they will be sustained, and people will talk about Frank Gehry and what he's given to architecture. And I thought, what am I giving as Dean of a business school? What am I giving as a senior executive in a university? And what are the people who I work with in companies giving? And in a sense, that idea of legacy means that we have to have all the time an eye to the future. Not just to the past. I mean, the word legacy sounds rather past-oriented, but actually I think it's enormously future-oriented. And so the legacy that I think management gives is sets of ideas, sets of ways of tackling things, and not that you will have been found to find the right answer. We don't construct palaces in the way that Frank Gehry can construct this palace, but nonetheless, I think we can leave a legacy of more effective management.